Will the government tighten their grip on big tech? Talking about that in the next panel is Iain Anderson from Cicero and his panel members.
Well, good morning, everyone. It's great to be at a live event. This is the only suit I have that the moths haven't attacked in the past 14, 15 months. So it really is good to be kind of live, and for everybody who's joining us in that old format of online Zoom meetings, then you're very, very welcome to. Hopefully, we're going to see you all in a room quite soon. So look, we're about to debate, I think, quite a really interesting issue. Will governments tighten their grip on big tech? And I think there are two or three words to kind of completely focus on there. Tighten, in this completely mashed up world, this sense of whether or not government has a role to play, well, maybe that's already been answered, but whether or not government is going to play an even bigger role. Well, the settled state of mind of people in this country, in Europe, and beyond, is for governments to play a bigger role. And then the other word I'm focusing on here is big tech. Politicians, regulators, they focus on the systemic. They focus on the big players, those who have the biggest footprints. And, well, sometimes they ignore the SMEs that are out there. And we want to kind of get into that conversation too. I've got an absolutely super panel. I'm absolutely delighted to have with me. We've got Chris Holmes. I think, to me, probably still better known as a Paralympian than a tech geek, but I think he's a tech geek these days. He chairs 5 of the all-party groups in Parliament, in the UK Parliament, including the one that wearing my Innovate Finance hat, I'm delighted to be involved in. That's obviously the Fintech group, but he's got a really big interest in democracy and tech, and I think that's all over this conversation. So great to see you, Chris. Great to have Virginie O'Shea with us, and Virginie runs a business called Firebrand Research. Her career has been kind of built around kind of capital markets, where the regulators sits, and helping and supporting tech businesses navigate all of that, and that's part of what we're going to discuss. And last but certainly not least, Mark John, who joined us today from Cardiff. I was reminiscing with him in the green room about my days in Cardiff. He runs Tramshed Tech. That's a pretty much beyond an incubator. It's a place where primarily tech businesses can grow and scale. So, with him, I really want to get into really where SMEs are perceived right now, while we just keep talking. The political debate is so much about big rather than small. So, look, Chris, over to you. Will governments tighten their grip on big tech? Is it already happening?
I don't think they'll necessarily tighten their grip. I'm not necessarily sure that they should tighten their grip. What we need is right-sized regulation. We need to understand the part that standards play. We need to understand how to get the best opportunities and the right protections in the mix. So in the UK, we have the online safety bill just coming through now, and that will rightly have a lot of scrutiny on it. But wider into financial services and tech, we have the Future Regulatory Framework Review. And what's critical is that there needs to be an understanding across the regulatory community of the role that regulation has to play. And that role should be rationally positive, not in any sense letting anybody be at the sharp end of the effects, particularly of big tech, but at the same time, understanding that regulators have a role to play in enabling all tech and indeed all businesses to flourish in the UK. So we have great startups, great founders, the FCA sandbox, a tremendous success, but we now really need to focus as much on scale-ups and really what I'd call, in the right way, the unicornification of the UK economy. We need that to happen. We can have it happening. It's not happening thus far. And doing that in no sense means having less regulation or indeed having an iron grip on it. It's crucially at the heart of it. It is that right-sized regulation.
There we go. Let's get unicornification. I can't even say it. Running as a hashtag. It's a great idea. Virginie, your perspective on this. I mean, so much has changed on this in the last 18 months. Where are we going on this essay question?
I mean, I think it's. I'm going to take a slightly different tack from Chris.
Good. We're going to have a debate.
I always have to. When I think about these things, I think about, who are the big techs? Now, who has the biggest influence in financial services at the moment? And who should we be most concerned about? And who are governments and regulators most concerned about? And you have to think about that word systemic you used. And the fact that we do have very large, and they're nearly all American or Chinese, technology companies that have, a network effect. Right? We're using them as cloud services providers. We're using them. They're offering payment services. They're offering, technology support, digital, analytics. They're working in our innovation departments as an industry. I mean, they've got fingers in lots of pies. Let me put it that way. So you've got to be concerned about that. And I think regulators and governments around the world have been looking at this. You think about the US Congress commissioned some research into this last year, looking at the big techs, looking at their influence on the political sphere, on the regulatory sphere, on the financial services sphere. And I think there's a lot of concern around the sort of pandemic times about operational resilience. And you have to think about that network effect. And you can't look at things in isolation. Yes, we have regulation, and we have the big techs facing, they have payment, they have to meet their obligations. If they're providing payment services, for example, they have to meet the regulatory obligations in each country on that front. They also have to think about data protection. But these are all individual silos of regulation and oversight, right? We're not looking at this bigger picture. And I think this is where the governments are getting quite concerned, is this connected effect. And I don't think this is where we think about the smaller enterprises, because generally you can track which pies they have fingers in and how much influence they have. But if you think about it from a competitive landscape, we essentially only have 3 main providers in cloud services. And that's something to be concerned about because of anti-competitive pricing, for example.
So the plumbing is becoming classically systemic from a regulator perspective.
Indeed. I'm all about the plumbing.
Right, good. Thank you. Let's go on to Mark. So Mark, as I say, you join us in today's conversation representing Wales, kind of the UK tech cluster. And what are you seeing, particularly working with SMEs into this conversation?
I almost get a sort of a dualistic sort of approach to this, sort of schizophrenic, that for instance, where we are in Cardiff, in our hub, we host various of the tech giants. So we are a Microsoft regional technology center. We host the Google Garage there. We work with AWS. I also then work with some of the smallest micros in Wales, literally pre-revenue, early stage growth companies. So what I'm really interested in is how does this stuff that happens on a macro level, if you like, on a big picture level, how does that actually filter down to the SME community, and as you say, Iain, the grassroots tech community that we both look after and help to grow? And I think there is some degree of sort of apprehension, based around when you look at the way that the government approaches the tech sector. Is it the role of government to accommodate these big beasts, or is it the role of government to tame the big beasts? Where does that sit in terms of that conversation? So really, we're looking at the effect of how this can sort of filter down, percolate down to actually the sector, that the small guys that Chris was mentioning, that actually are on the ground, becoming potentially those unicorns that we mentioned. I'm proud to say that we host 2 of the Welsh companies being tipped as the first unicorns in Wales. amplifying my pin pad.
Keep the hashtag going.
Yeah, and it's well overdue. But this is what I think was very interesting about the Khalifa review, is also looking at where are these new emerging clusters. So, we host Fintech Wales, for instance, in our building. And it's all about how do we get those, in our case, the big beasts are actually the primes and the enterprise organizations. How do we get those big organizations working with these small, more agile tech companies? And I make the analogy a bit like, if you think of those primes being like super tankers, it takes a long time for them to change direction, whereas we work a lot with the little pilot boats, the tugboats that can actually work and help them change in a much more nimble way. So it's on one hand, the big picture stuff. How does that actually affect the guys that we work with? And I compare notes with my counterparts all around the UK as part of the UK Tech Cluster Group. So we represent Wales in that, but there are another 12 regions and nations of the UK. We have some very similar sort of stories, if you like, similar challenges, but some quite discrete and bespoke, if you like, issues in our own areas as well.
So, left and right has been completely mashed up by the last 18 months. I mean, big is beautiful. Big government spending, whether or not it's in Wales, in Holyrood, in Westminster, oh yes, in the White House, yes, in the European Commission too. Big is beautiful, Chris. We're only going in one direction on this, aren't we? And I mean, tell me if I'm wrong, and are you worried about a crowding out effect here?
Certainly there are 407 billion reasons to think very carefully about what has happened over the last 16 months and what are the right lessons rather than potentially, as always, the wrong lessons to take from it. It was right that the government stepped in the way that it did, but at that point there was a real opportunity to have fabulous fintechs who were ready to go in terms of the C-bills and B-bills situation.
Well, the summer of last year.
Well,
yeah.
Pre-summer, more sort of late spring last year, ready to go, could be stood up, couldn't be, quote, ported into HMT to do it. Some of them got a piece of the action, such as Anne Boden's brilliant Starling Bank, but nowhere near enough and nowhere near quick enough. And that showed this sense that there's still so much of a way to go to understand that fintech, techfin, whichever way you look at it, has to be seen as the mainstream and brought into it rather than reaching for the more, if you will, traditional solution. So right that the government stepped in, right that the government supported business, but as we come through it, we need to understand how do we build an economy, take the lessons that make it a more inclusive economy and society, and I use that word inclusive as broad as you possibly want to take it, to Virginia's point, to understand this, that it's far easier to put all your stuff onto, say, for example, the AWS cloud, far easier to put that on there than to take it off again. We need to ensure...
And faster.
Yeah. And we just need to absolutely ensure that there's that vibrant market and all the great individuals in the Tramshed and right around all of the clusters correctly identified have that opportunity, because not in a overcooking it way, but in a rational way, there's a real opportunity for the UK, but an opportunity is not an inevitability. And it has to be, to your point exactly, that there isn't crowding out, that there is crowding in. Government should do what things government is best at doing, building the stage, doing things like in payment, putting in some of the rails, and then allowing all of the fabulous innovators and entrepreneurs, small, medium, and hopefully even more mega businesses as we go forward, to do what they do best.
Are we all in the same place on this, though, Virginie? I mean, given what you do and what you advise companies on, we've got rhetoric from the Chancellor that is wanting to make the UK the best and the brightest. You see it from every government. You see it in Wales. You see it in Scotland. You see, they all say this stuff. And you read the Chancellor's Mansion House speech the other day, and it's all about the place to do it. And then you read just a couple of pages into the document and you read what Andrew Bailey has to say, slightly different, and you read then what the FCA has to say, very different. What's going on in your mind?
I mean, I think as a whole, when we look at things from the financial services perspective, we think about it from the bank's perspective, it's usually when I hate using analogies or, trite phrases like this, but it's when the rubber hits the road as the regulator you care about, less so the government, to be honest, because they're the ones that actually make the rules, right? They may be directed by government, but quite often, you look at the FCA, you look at the Bank of England and the FSA as was, right? They've always gold-plated regulation. We always go that one step further than the rest of the world. I don't know why we do it.
Well,
but
the UK.
The UK does. It always has done in terms of financial services regulation to make things more. And I'm not disagreeing that it's a good idea to do to some extent, right? Because we want to have your markets protected and things like that. But certainly, when it comes to big tech, there's a big difference here. These aren't UK firms, right? We've got to understand this. They're influential firms that are not coming from the UK. So I think there's a political undercurrent here about protecting the markets from those big techs and that big tech influence.
Well, but the other words that are coming through, I mean, let's cut to the chase. It's in this, it's in the title for this session. It's not just about online harm. It's not just about big. It's also about national security.
It is, absolutely, and it should be, because if you look at the number of cybersecurity incidents that have been happening during pandemic times, they've gone up, exponentially. There's lots of statistics out there to show you that this is, the consumers are being targeted, banks, financial institutions, even vendors and fintechs are being targeted by this, right? Because it's quite easy, as it happens, to get into the walls of an institution, unfortunately. And we were kind of caught unawares in some regards. And I'll go back to this point of systemic risk and systemic concentration, right? Big tech is a big target. Not that they don't have the power to invest in all of this stuff, not that they don't have the understanding and they invest much more than the average bank in cybersecurity, but still it does make them a target. And if you think about this operationally, think about the operational resilience, the systemic resilience of our industry. If everybody's in one particular cloud and that cloud gets taken down, what do we do? That's where we have to think about these things. That's what the regulator has to think about. We have to protect our markets, and you have to think about the weakest links there.
So, sorry, just to keep going with this, but fintech and tech has really wanted to come together and embrace each other. Particularly in the last 3 or 4 years, for those operational plumbing reasons that you've referred to. Do you think we're going to see increasing wariness?
I think there's already wariness when it comes to large banks working with small fintechs. Look at the vendor risk management practice out there. You think about the pages. I'm sure if there's fintechs in the room, they're well aware of this, right? They've had to go through the process of being onboarded by a large bank. It's not easy. It takes years, right? So this is why startups struggle and why so many fail. I think the previous panel was talking about the success rate. A lot of it is to do with this riskiness and this fear of working with a small fintech that might disappear within a few years. So, yes, the bigger technology firms tend to be able to stay, and they appear more resilient, but they're only as strong as their weakest link, right? This has been proven time and time again. We've got to think about all of the network effect here and where all of the fintechs are sitting as well, right? Because they're all sitting on the AWS or Azure cloud as well. So what kind of concentration risk are we thinking about here? It's not just the banks themselves, right?
Mark, again, before we came on stage, you were telling me that you've seen an absolute explosion in terms of interest in the past sort of 15, 16 months. You're listening to this conversation about regulation and policy and politics. Seems to be passing most people by, what you were telling me earlier.
Yeah, as I said, there's the big picture stuff, and then there's the detailed granular stuff as well. But I think a couple of pertinent points, again, just listening to comments there, is that one of the relationships we have is with an equivalent space in Dublin, which is the Guinness Enterprise Centre. Fantastic space.
Free Guinness?
It's in the true spirit of the tech scene. On a Friday, you do get free drinks, so there we are.
Can't wait to get Dublin again.
We actually have a gin trolley in Cardiff, but there we are.
What time do you need us?
But I've been struck by, and I made a series of visits there to establish a formal partnership.
And Tessa Guinness.
Yeah, and Tessa Guinness. And I was struck by the idea that, of course, that economy is founded upon hosting some of these big beasts.
Right.
What would be the effect of losing that if government were asked to step in? We've seen something literally in the past week in Wales, where one of our semiconductor firms, in fact, the biggest chip manufacturer in the UK, Newport Wafer Fab, have been acquired for 65 million by Nexperia. Now, Nexperia are wholly owned by the Chinese. So you've got a wholly owned Chinese subsidiary buying an indigenous, if you like, Welsh company. And this raised a few hackles amongst us of the journalists who said, why are Welsh government allowing this to happen? So to what extent can we expect government to step into these situations and to impose themselves upon that? Now, Welsh government had a small equity stake in the business. But it does raise that interesting question of when you have an appetite for third parties to invest in areas of the UK, and again, I'm very interested, because I speak both from a Welsh perspective, if you like, from a local perspective, but from a national perspective, seeing how other parts of the UK are sort of branding themselves. So we did something called the 12 Clusters of Tech, a report recently, which will end up in London Tech Week being compiled later this year. And in that, we were asked to identify some of our, what we would see as our areas of specialist sort of interest and expertise. For us, fintech was up there, it was one of the three, if you like, that we chose. But you could probably look at other parts of the UK and say, well, Northern Ireland would say, they're very strong in cyber, we're very strong in cyber. Scotland would say, we're really strong in fintech. To what extent can either national governments or devolved administrations actually get involved in that picking winners and protecting, if you like, what could be regarded as a bit like national assets?
You've been reading my script. Yeah, but so because you can read this question another way, can't you? Will government tighten the grip on big tech, i.e. national champions, winners, a tech industrial strategy? Sorry, we're not allowed to talk about industrial strategy anymore, are we? But we've seen, certainly from this government, you're kind of seeing it across Europe generally, you're absolutely seeing it from Biden's administration too, this idea of thinking about national champions. Chris, where are we going with that? How might it, given your all-party interests in the House, how might that play out here in the UK?
We absolutely need to do that, should do that, pick winners, both in terms of potential sectors, potential businesses. If you look at the ARIA model, the Advanced Research Invention Agency, that has to do that. It's not a place that government or the civil service are used to, so we have to bring in the right talent to be able to make those big bets. And understandably, some of them won't come through. That's just fine, so long as the strategy and the approach is right and the risk tolerance is understood. Because we have specific competitive advantages and we need to take those. For example, going back to some earlier points, I was chatting with a great British company earlier this week, Greengage, who want to get a banking license over here to bank crypto and fintechs, finding it extraordinarily difficult. But the opportunity they see is not only to partially solve that banking issue, but to ensure that those deposits, those funds which can go into the tech and the broader economy are banked and deposited in the UK. Great idea. To Virginia's point on cyber, cyber has to be a sweet spot for the UK. We've got great businesses like NCC, for example, and that is only going to become an increasing business. Elements of AI, particularly when we look at the ethical AI piece, and we did a report in the Lords on that in 2018. And finally, to the very essence of who we are as a nation and what we believe in, just last summer we published our Select Committee report on democracy and digital technologies. And this is really the bit for everybody to get, I think. It's not just that certain investors could lose their shirt if we get this wrong with big tech. It's not just that it could have an adverse effect. It's not just the extraordinarily extractive nature of a lot of those big tech models. What's at stake here, if it's not nationally and globally appreciated, is the very essence of our democracy.
Have we got in place, just sticking with you, Chris, and then I'll come through the others again, but, we've seen a lot of government reviews. We've seen Khalifa. We've seen, from a capital perspective, Hill as well. But do we have the right parts of the jigsaw in place? Thinking about fintech, this is a fintech conference, so let's do that, in order to make those national champions happen, or what's missing? And then I'll pick up exactly the same point with the others.
We certainly have some of them. Ron's review was a great piece of work. Yeah. And as you say, we need to ensure that we have all the pieces which go right from pre-seed through unicornification through to, if you are then at that level, you should absolutely want and have the right circumstances to list in London. Yes, we have many of the pieces of the jigsaw. Yes, we need more. And the crucial piece that we need isn't really a piece of jigsaw at all. It's that sense of even more leadership, coherence, coordination through HMT, the bank, the regulators, right through. So you have this golden thread of possibility and coherence to ensure that the promise of fintech can be delivered on, and then allow all the great people at Tramshed and around all the other clusters to do their stuff.
Virginie, your perspective, do you think we've got the right jigsaw in place? Agree or disagree? Yeah.
I'm not sure it's an easy question to answer in an agree or disagree frame of reference here. But I mean, I think we need more transparency, certainly into the sector, right? And I think that's one thing, and understanding of it, getting to grips with it. That's why we see the FCA has a sandbox, for example, following in the vein of the Monetary Authority of Singapore. I think getting to grips with technology, understanding its influence, how it's evolving, is very important. So I think we do have some elements there, but as I say, again, Mark made an interesting reference about a Chinese foothold in Wales. I mean, I think that's what prompted Congress in the US under the previous administration, not Biden's, to look at big techs, right? This is all about fear, about influence of foreign actors in your country. And the thing is, with a big technology firm, they have the resources, they have the financing to go into a market and destroy other vendors, let's put it that way. I mean, you can think about that network effect, that power, the data that they can manipulate, and all of these things make them quite fearsome and in a competitive frame of reference. So we really do have to think about these things. So transparency is very important. And I think that's why we're seeing in the EU, they're trying to foster a new cloud services provider. So it's not going to be an American or a Chinese firm, go figure, right? So that they're trying to do it inorganically almost. It's quite bizarre. I don't think governments can create an atmosphere for innovation. Unfortunately, you have to have it there to begin with. But the Gaia X project's very interesting from that perspective, to try and force the industry to react and respond and develop something because there's demand for it. So certainly I think there's a fine balance. You need transparency, but you also need sensible regulation as well to protect your markets.
Again, at the cutting edge, Mark, we're working and seeing these businesses. What are they saying to you about regulation right now here? Look, why are they coming to Wales? Why are they coming to Cardiff? But what are they saying about the UK regulatory setup more generally right now?
I think I would say this, wouldn't I, given what we do and where I come from. But we sit in a commercial, competitive environment. We're a commercial operation. We make our revenue from looking after these companies. But what we do with them, which I think is really quite illuminative, and it goes to your point about transparency, is that whenever companies come into us, we basically sit down with them and talk through the whole of their business plan on a confidential basis, of course. But what it means is that we get to see what are the things that really are sort of affecting them, what are the issues. And it means that we can build a a proper spirit of collaborative enterprise, if you like, which means that the small guys can work with the big guys. We're just about to set up a cyber innovation hub in Wales as well, because we see that horizontal of cyber sitting across everything that's happening currently. But it's a combination of the privacy that goes with that, but then the openness, the transparency, and the collaborative spirit, which enables us to identify, common issues and common opportunities. Again, speaking from Welsh perspective, where we have a devolved administration as well as a UK administration, there's been a reluctance to do things like pick winners because it's the public purse, and things like de minimis haven't really helped that process. That might be one benefit of coming out of the EU is that that's relaxed, but there are common issues. But we feel from the sort of SME community, if you like, that some of these ideas are being formulated at a very high level, and to what extent will the impact of them sort of resonate with companies further down the food chain? So I was very encouraged in the Khalifa review that the idea of collaboration seemed to be sort of right at the heart of it as well. And frankly, from a Welsh point of view, getting some more patient capital into Wales, because we feel like we're underinvested, undercapitalised.
Right. So look, it appears to me there is this sort of dichotomy running through some of our conversation between national champions and global plumbing, to come back to the plumbing world. We've just had a G7 and actually a G20, which seems to be, a long way to go, but edging towards an agreement, in this particular case, around global corporate tax rates. Yeah. What chance, let me start with you, Virginie, this one. What chance do you think to square the circle between national champions and international agreements to, at least create a level playing field, or is that all mashed up right now too?
I mean, I struggle with the idea of level playing fields across the globe, because national market protectionism comes out every time. It's hard to avoid it, right?
More now than ever?
I mean, I wouldn't say so. I think we've always had it. This is the thing, right? I'm not sure it's changed too much. It just changes form in the way that we see it enacted. And I think a lot of sensible regulation would be international, it'd be global. We wouldn't have so many different flavors of things that you have to do, reporting different data sets in each different jurisdiction in a slightly different way. I mean, if we had proper level playing fields, we wouldn't have this nonsense that we have in financial services. But we have it because of national protectionism and national interests, and they come above this international framework. So unfortunately, I think we're always going to have it. We're not all going to be sitting around a fire singing Kumbaya, unfortunately, from the regulatory perspective, ever.
Another COVID effect, maybe. Let's go to Chris on this one. As I say, we've seen some agreements on tax. Edging towards agreements on tax. Let's see whether or not we ever get there. And tax and tech, pretty important point around thinking about Guinness drinking going on in Dublin. It's a pretty important part of the picture for some governments. Where do you see this landing?
I think, again, back to the earlier point I made on standards. Standards is another good way into this, I think, and we have an opportunity. Bearing in mind the theme of this conference, if I take crypto, for example, we have a real opportunity in the UK to be at the leading edge internationally in terms of working through and coming up with really effective international standards. I think standards are underplayed in terms of their effect. I'm not claiming they're the solution to all ills, but they can be effective in an international context. Yes, greater collaboration and cooperation has to be a good thing, but as Virginie rightly pointed out, there always needs to be a clear and crucially coherent understanding of the national interest and how that plays in. And going right up to the global level, what have we learned from this current pandemic? Well, it would certainly seem at least opportune to look very closely at some of those international organisations that were set up with all of the right intentions, largely post-Second World War. What do we need now going forward to have a nation and an international environment which can, at its best, really get the best out of that perfect alchemy of talent and technology, inclusion and innovation? Not easy, but I think we can have a great deal of clarity on some of the points that we want to be aiming at.
So a new Bretton Woods?
Yeah, if you will. I think
it's been talked about for a long time.
Yeah,
Ed Conway at Sky wrote a brilliant book about this. Thoroughly recommend it. But it never seems to happen.
No, and this could barely be a bigger or more opportune moment. I'll put it no stronger than this. I truly believe that we owe it to all those people cruelly taken before their time from this terrible virus to really struggle, and it will be a struggle, to engage with these complex issues, to try and get some better ground on which to stand, to get the best out of technology. Because at its heart, new technologies, extraordinary potential, but we just need to consider they are just the latest and potentially the greatest tools in our COVID well-washed hands. It's down to us. If we stuff this up, it won't be a failure of technology, it will be a failure of humanity.
Wow, right. I think there's, given the way we've all been sort of thinking and addressing issues over the past sort of 15, 16 months, there's an awful lot there, I think, for policymakers to think about. Just before we close, we've just got a couple of minutes left, and I want to try and get your conference back on schedule. We were running a few minutes late, so to the organisers, I'll probably clip this in a couple of minutes. Mark, give us some of the a sense of some of the fantastic businesses that have been kind of coming through your hub in this period for the past 15, 16 months, which has been very difficult. Give us some of the bright spots.
Well, it's been, when it first broke, we on March the 17th, 2020, had to close our doors overnight. So I was staying at our own business, falling off the edge of a cliff. We basically, our revenue is based upon hosting people in a communal collision space. So we were filled with trepidation. I have to say that the things that were put in place by government to help us got us through that, and got us through that with the other companies that we were working with as well. We then had the ironic situation that we are actually moving new people into the building while we were still in lockdown. So I did something 2 years ago. I sat on something called the Digital Innovation Review of Wales, which is Professor Phil Brown. Pre-COVID, we identified that the real opportunity was through AI, through ML, through the way the data was being used. There were real opportunities to actually look at repurposing the workforce, to new ways of upskilling, new ways of using digital as a way to do that. Our fear was that there would be a resistance to that. What happened as an unintended consequence of COVID is that people have become sort of digitally native, if you like. So we think there's a huge opportunity now to use that. I still have trepidation about what happens right at the end of the furlough scheme. For small businesses, that still could be, again, looking at a cliff edge. But we think that emphasis on reskilling, upskilling, and using digital and tech, absolutely agreed. Tech as an enabler, tech for good. That could be a real opportunity coming out of this terrible crisis.
Virginie, you're just to cap us conversation. Hopeful, given some of the things that we've touched on today. Fearful. Where would you, given where you sit, where do you think we are?
I think equal parts both. That's probably not the best response that you want there, but I think there's lots of things to be hopeful about. I think if you want to look at tech for good, the things that have happened around sustainability, there's increased investor interest in ESG, the environmental, sustainable and governance changes across the landscape. We're seeing a lot of positive moves there, and I think COVID's helped to digitalise a lot of things as well, which is, we had wet ink signatures flying around the city for far too long, and we've had too many fax machines out there for far too long. They're still operating, God knows why, but we need to get rid of some of these things. So I think that's positive overall for the industry, is to move away from these analogue things that we've been holding on to for ages.
I can hear fax machines being being thrown
set
out
on
of
fire.
windows, set on fire. I know nobody that knows about a fax machine in my business anymore. But
fund services, unfortunately, capital markets. There's lots of pockets of them.
There is still about that. Look, I hope you've enjoyed this canter from kind of global to micro all the way through. I mean, just about an hour's time, the House of Commons is hearing a statement on online harms and again some events over the weekend about hate speech. How these conversations come together and how governments grapple with this question has been really, I think, utterly transformed over the past 2 or 3 years. The essential question that we've tried to debate today as to whether or not big is beautiful, I think is still up in the air. Can you just join me in thanking our fantastic panel?